I heard about your speaker opportunity by virtue of being reading that Representative Michael Frame, a Democrat from the St. Louis region, was invited to speak, and it's my understanding he was to speak this past Monday, and the schedule change has him speaking next Monday. When we called up, I said I would prefer a debate. I would prefer that he and I appear on the same platform, and I think it'd be more interesting for you, and I'll make myself available for that purpose, should you want to invite us back. Maybe a conflict and a clash would draw a bigger crowd, but I'm delighted that those of you who have joined us did make time to come out today. Now, I shook, I think, everyone's hand among the students when you came in and asked you where you're from, and with a few exceptions, most of you are native Missourians, right? There was one young lady from India and another from California, but currently residing in Jefferson City, but most of you are native Missourians. So I'm a history buff, and I'm going to ask you a question. I don't know if you know, Rob Krause probably knows the answer to this question. How many congressional seats did the state of Missouri have in the 1920s? The 1920s that my parents were, the decade my parents were born into. Anybody know? Anybody want to take a guess? Rob, you're not allowed to. Yes, sir. John? 11? 11? Anybody else have a guess? 11 is not correct. The answer is 16 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, which when you add the 2 senators in, makes for 11 electoral votes. I'm sorry, makes for 18 electoral votes, okay? So, how many seats does Missouri have today in the U.S. Congress? We have 8. We are exactly half as important, half as weighty, if you will, to use that word, as we were in the 1920s, relative to vis-a-vis the other states in the Union. The Missouri that I grew up in the 60s and 70s, until 1981, had 10 seats in Congress. That was brought home to me because I resided in the 10th district as a boy, the southeast Missouri. So we had 12 electoral votes. In 1981, because Missouri had not kept up with population growth in places like Texas, Arizona, Florida, and other faster growing states, all of which are right-to-work states, we lost a seat. We went from 10 to 9. And we had 9 seats for the next 3 decades. And after the 2010 census, we got the bad news that Missouri was losing another seat. We would go from 9 to 8. Missouri is shrinking in importance vis-a-vis the other states in the Union. We are half as important today as we were in the 1920s that my parents were born into. Now, if you listen to Governor Nixon's State of the State message, delivered to the joint session of the General Assembly in the month of January, you heard a very rosy scenario about how the state's just doing great. We are on the comeback trail and just stay the course under the leadership of the current chief executive of this state, and we're just doing fantastic. Maybe you buy that. I have some facts to lay on the table for this discussion. They are both from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, published in the last few months. Page 1 stories. Here's the first one. 2010 census data is more bad news for area families. Poverty up, incomes down. The story related that Missouri was one of only 2 states in America to have falling median household income last year. And more recently, just a few weeks ago, let's see, this was March 14th, business section, page 1. The young face bleak job market. Only 31% of St. Louisans aged 16 to 19 were employed in 2012, down 47% from 2000. That's not my saying that. That's the daily newspaper in St. Louis, Missouri saying that. These are indicia, these are indisputable, inarguable indicia of decline. You want some more data points? United Van Lines is the nation's largest moving company in this country. It's headquartered in St. Louis. Those of you from the St. Louis region may recognize the headquarters is out there on I-44, around, I guess, between the 270 and Fenton. And they keep track, by virtue of it being their business to do so, about the population movements. Who is moving where, when, and under what circumstances. They came out about the time that bleak September headline I just showed you about falling income and poverty rising. They came out with a little noticed story. The only place I saw it was on KMOX. But they released the facts that the 3 cities that people are moving out of the fastest in the United States are New York, Chicago, St. Louis. Now, why is it worth focusing on the St. Louis economy in a discussion like this? We don't have all afternoon to dissect every economic trend in Missouri, but St. Louis is our largest metropolitan area. As you know, it's about 40% of our state's population, and it's about 50% of the economic activity in our state. We cannot have a healthy Missouri economy if we don't have a healthy St. Louis economy. And St. Louis's economy, too often in recent years, has been the sick man. Missouri overall unemployment, or employment rates today are below what they were in 2008, 6 years later. We're below what we were in number of Missourians employed. All these things are indicia of decline. The United Van Lines report related that especially younger Missourians, where are they moving? They're moving to the south and to the west, seeking opportunity. I come from a town called Cape Girardeau in southeast Missouri. It is quite similar to Jefferson City in many respects, in the fact that in demographic makeup, they're both heavy German Catholic settlement. We probably have a few more Lutherans down there than they have in Jefferson City, but in any case, they're roughly comparable in size, both under 40,000. It might interest you to know that a state like Texas, which while we were losing a congressional seat for the second time in 3 decades, Texas gained 4 congressional seats in the last census. While we lost 1, they gained 4. Texas is gaining a city the size, close to the size of Jefferson City or Cape Girardeau almost every month. A net in-migration to Texas last year of 360,000 people moving in there. While Missouri in the last 2 years has moved into a category before we were subject to losing a congressional seat because we weren't growing as fast as other states. That's what happened in 1981. We were not losing, but we had failed to grow as fast. The last 2 years, sadly, that has changed as we've actually had net out-migration of people out of our state. We are now, in the last 2 years, losing population. Now, Texas gained 4 seats. What other states were winners? Well, Florida was a winner. Florida gained 2 seats while we were losing 1. Tennessee, a neighboring state. A lot of people don't know that we neighbor Tennessee, but we do. In fact, I was at a national meeting and these people around the table were saying they were from Tennessee, and they were saying we're the only state in the nation that borders 8 other states. And I raised my hand and said, that's not right. Missouri borders 8 other states, and they were trying to, in their minds, count, and they had left out Oklahoma. So we have a small border with Tennessee. Tennessee, I have some experience personally because I'm from southeast Missouri, and we had cousins in western Tennessee, and I was growing up there in the 60s, and I was 8, 9 years old, and we'd go to visit my cousins in the late 60s in Tennessee. And I remember thinking, wow, this state is really backward. My state of Missouri has a lot more going on than Tennessee. This is a backward state. Well, at the time, let's examine some data points for Missouri at the time. When I was in the 4th grade, we studied our state, and in the textbooks it said proudly, St. Louis was number 2 in auto production to Detroit. In fact, Missouri, as a state, was number 2 in auto production to Michigan. I don't know, in speaking to this young crowd, if you have an appreciation for what an iconic American automobile the Corvette Stingray was. But the Corvette Stingray, perhaps the quintessential American sports car, was made in St. Louis. It was not only made in Missouri. The Chevy plant making every Corvette Stingray ever made was made not only in St. Louis, but in the city of St. Louis, and not only in the city of St. Louis, but on the north side that is abandoned and bleak today, a shell of its former self. Every Corvette Stingray ever made was made there until 1981 when they took the production south. Now, what about more recently? Well, a lot less than a decade ago, there were 4 plants, assembly plants, producing autos in St. Louis of the big 3, because Chrysler had 2 plants. Remember I just told you about United Van Lines? Out in that neighborhood along 44, on the other side, the north side of I-44, there were 2 enormous Chrysler plants until just a few years ago. And after the government bailed out Chrysler, they closed those plants and took a bulldozer to the site, and it's a vast parking lot now of about 350 acres, where thousands of UAW auto workers were on the line just a few short years ago. The Ford plant up by Hazelwood, near the airport, was in operation. Closed, I don't know. I was part of an effort, a bipartisan effort to try to keep it open in 2003, 4, 5, and 6. I think it closed in either 6 or 7, finally, never to reopen again. What are the numbers that indicate those declines? Well, where we had 4 auto plants less than a decade ago in St. Louis, and now have 1 out at Winsville, the GM plant, we now have faced this very bleak fact, that anybody in this argument, and I hope you'll discuss this with Representative Frame on Monday and ask him about it perhaps. 78% of the United Auto Workers, union workers on the line who had a job in assembly automobiles in St. Louis, Missouri, less than a decade ago, no longer do. Those jobs are gone. They're gone and not coming back. That is the effect, one of the effects, of forced union policy that you can see in the devastated lives of formerly employed auto workers here in our great state of Missouri. They are gone. Missouri is no longer a center of anything like the thriving auto industry that we had when I was growing up. There is a very thriving auto industry in America. It is no longer found in large concentrations as it used to be in St. Louis and Detroit. It is increasingly found in a swath of states from the Carolinas to Texas. And with the exception of a GM plant that was in Atlanta from 40 or 50 years ago, that's been there a long time. Not a single one of those states of the old Confederacy had an auto plant in 1980, excepting the GM plant in Atlanta. 1980, folks, was not that long ago. An enormous influx of auto production, manufacture, assembly, and the auto parts manufacture and assembly that goes with it has come south in the last 3.5 decades. In 2010, less than 4 years ago in the summer, I found myself at an organization in Kentucky that I had never heard of before called the Southern Automotive Conference. And all it is a collection of southern and border states that included West Virginia and Kentucky, and nobody from Missouri had ever attended, and so I went to see what was going on in the auto industry that used to be such a mainstay of employment in my home state and no longer is anything like what it was then. And what I found was 15 southern and border states that are just surging ahead. They put up on a PowerPoint presentation I-65, which comes down from the north through Indianapolis, down to Nashville and into the south, I believe into Alabama, and I-75 to the east, which comes down from Detroit through the great cities of Ohio and then through Kentucky into other parts of the southeast. I guess it goes on to Florida. And all along the I-65 and I-75 corridor, as you get further south, they had the assembly plants located, and they had the hundreds and hundreds of parts plants that are locating to be close to the assembly plants, now no longer located in St. Louis and Detroit, but in these southern states that are right-to-work states. What else should I discuss here on automobiles? We have other data points I want to point you to, and that they include income growth, opportunity, the creation of jobs, and I have some points I want to share with you just that are written down in bullet points. Fact, the top 5 states with the lowest unemployment are right-to-work states. The bottom 5 are forced union states. Fact, the 10 states with the highest percentage gains in household employment from the recession's end through September of 2012 are all right-to-work states. Conversely, 9 of the 12 states with the worst job losses over the same period are forced union. Fact, Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the feds, show none of the 5 states suffering the worst private sector job losses over the last decade has a right-to-work law, while 4 of the 5 states with the greatest private sector job gains have right-to-work laws. Fact, from 2008 to 9, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, jobs in right-to-work states grew at 9.1%, 2.5 times faster than in forced union states. Fact, almost 70% of business executives specify right to work as a key factor in site selection, according to the annual corporate survey published by Area Development magazine. Now, before the 2 states that I'll mention in a minute, Indiana and Michigan, passed right to work, the most recent state to do it was Oklahoma, passed it in a referendum in 2001. Our neighbors in Oklahoma there added more union jobs last year than we did here in forced union Missouri. And it wasn't close. It was 40-something thousand union jobs added in the right-to-work state of Oklahoma versus 11,000 lost here. That conclusively shows, to my satisfaction, and I hope to yours, that right-to-work is not anti-union. It should not be considered to be anti-union. If none of us on my side of the argument have anything against unions if they can sell themselves to their workers. So, fact, average compensation per private sector worker in right-to-work states is higher than in forced unionism states once one accounts for regional differences in the cost of living. According to the nonpartisan Missouri Economic Research and Information Center, the average compensation in 2010 per private sector employee in right-to-work states was $56,830, roughly $1,100 more than the average for forced unionism states. Fact, since 2007, all of Missouri's bordering right-to-work states, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Tennessee, have enjoyed a higher percentage increase in personal income than has Missouri. You think that might have something to do with the fact that that people generally, but especially people your age and up to 10 or 15 years older, are moving out of Missouri to seek higher compensation and greater opportunity for their families? I think it does. Now, I want to share with you another data point that really came home to me. A few years ago, I picked up a copy, it was probably 4 years ago, I picked up a copy of Forbes magazine, one of the most authoritative business magazines, and I would commend it to you to take a look at Forbes, and they have a great website. Forbes had the arresting headline over there, very fact-filled article. The headline was entitled, "The 10 Fastest Dying Cities in America." Think of that. You see a headline on a reputable publication that's going to tell you what are the 10 fastest dying cities in America. And with some trepidation, I picked it up and as I thumbed through to the article, I was worried that St. Louis would be on that list. in my home state, the state and the city that I love. Well, the good news is St. Louis was not on that list. That's the good news. What cities were on that list? Well, I can name most of them for you. There was, in the great state of Michigan, this is 2009 or 10, there was Detroit and Flint. And in the state of Ohio, 4 cities made the list. Cleveland, Canton, Dayton, and Youngstown. That's 6 of the 10 fastest dying cities in America in Michigan and Ohio. What were the other cities on the list? Buffalo, New York made the list. Catastrophic population loss up there. Not equal to total Democrat-controlled and total Union-controlled Detroit, but working on it. And so add Buffalo, that's 7. Wheeling, West Virginia was another, and Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania makes 9, I think. I can't remember the 10th, but it was also in what you might depict on the map as the Northeast and Old North Rust Belt states. Now, why is that worth mentioning? Because of this. Our economy in the 2 urban areas in this state, sadly, too closely resembles the 10 cities on that list and the 9 I just listed for you than it does the winner states and the winning cities that young people are moving to. So you and I, if you're a Missourian, or if you're not from Missouri and you choose to stay here, which I hope you do, we have a fundamental choice to make, or I might say a set of fundamental choices to make about what kind of state we're going to be. One of the founders of my political party, Abraham Lincoln, and our first successful standard bearer, put it this way. He said, it's not just, I'm paraphrasing before I get to his actual quote, but he said, it's not just where you are now. It is, he said, using the 19th century phrasing, it is whither you are trending. It is, in other words, which direction are you going and how fast are you going there? And so, to me, the great haunting concern that I had when I read that article about the 10 fastest dying cities in America was simply this. The great concern is that St. Louis, and to some extent Kansas City, and their regional economies too closely resemble those 10 fastest dying cities, instead of resembling the winner cities of the recent past and the 21st century. So, do we want to come to more closely resemble the Clevelands, the Cantons, the Daytons, the Youngstowns, the Buffalo, New Yorks, the Detroits, and the Flints, or do we, which have been losing such catastrophic population loss for 6 decades now, or do we want to refashion ourselves, retool ourselves so that we can more closely resemble the Dallases, the Austins, the San Antonios, the Houstons, the Tempe, Arizonas, the Scottsdales, the Atlanta, Georgias, and the Charlotte, North Carolinas. I want there to be a thriving, vibrant Missouri economy at every level, urban and rural, that will attract bright young people like you and keep you here once you make a choice, I hope, to stay here. And yet we see the inexorable facts. Again, this isn't me saying this. This isn't Peter Kinder saying this. This is the United States Department of Census Bureau, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which rarely misses an opportunity to slam me and candidates and causes I believe in. And this is also the Post-Dispatch, talking about your job opportunities. You're Missouri. This is your Missouri. This is Jay Nixon and Barack Obama's Missouri. Are you satisfied with that? I'm not. And I want to do something about it. I want to achieve more flexibility in our labor markets and more worker freedom to choose. Now, about that last phrase, I feel the need to elucidate that a bit. Some of you may have followed the reforms pushed through the legislature over great union and left-wing opposition and progressive opposition in the state of Wisconsin by Governor Scott Walker and his majorities in the Wisconsin House and Senate. This is an epic battle that raged through, he was elected in 2010 and the new majority seated in the winter of 2011, and they immediately went to work on union reforms that they passed, if I understand correctly, as part of their budget process. And included in there was a very simple and novel reform that is not right to work, by the way. But it did vastly increase worker choice vis-a-vis the bosses who control the unions and give the orders on what will be done and what won't be done in the workplace and politically. And the reform was simply this: an annual certification vote. What's a certification vote? Okay, very simple. Typically in the workplace, in XYZ factory making XYZ widgets, a decision was taken in a vote that's called a certification vote. And let's say that vote was taken in 1946 in the plant right after World War II. And the voters and the workers, the employees in that plant, voted overwhelmingly to certify, and hence the word certification election, to certify the United Steelworkers as their exclusive bargaining agent, that is, make it a union plant. Okay? Under previous Wisconsin law and under current Missouri law, that vote, taken 68 years ago, or 78 years ago, in some cases, or 50 years ago, is never revisited. The vote taken in 1946 establishing the United Steelworkers or the Teamsters or the Laborers Union as the exclusive bargaining agent is in cement, in concrete for all time. And Scott Walker said, hey, why don't we give the workers an annual vote? If they vote to keep the union, great. The union has sold itself, has proved its worth, has made itself choice-worthy. If they don't vote in the annual recertification vote, then the union's no longer the exclusive bargaining agent. You can still belong to a union, but they don't control the workplace as the exclusive agent. That's all. Guess what happened in Wisconsin? Government employee union membership is down 60% statewide in Wisconsin. Why? Because the workers have never, ever had a choice. Not this generation of workers or the previous generation of workers. For the first time, a courageous American leader, elected by the people, who was subject to a recall election by the same labor unions and left-wing and progressive activists I just described, who opposed his reforms, and he survived that by a healthy margin, their attempt to bounce him out of office before his term was half over. But that leader, Scott Walker, got that reform through on an annual certification vote, and one of the first units to decertify was the Kenosha, Wisconsin National Education Association, NEA. The third largest NEA bargaining unit in the state voted 70% not to recertify. Now, their predecessors in those schools in Kenosha had voted for it, and maybe it was a good decision back then. But this generation, nobody currently alive in the workplace and fogging a mirror and showing up for work in the workplace today had ever had a choice as to whether to be represented by the National Education Association as the exclusive bargaining agent. And the first time they were given that choice, 70% said no. Now, I don't know a lot about your generation, but insofar as I know anything about you, I know that you're all about choice. You're all about making choices in your own lives. Choices that previous generations have not had a chance to even think about. When I was your age and younger, growing up in the 60s and 70s, for our music, we were limited to whatever the AM top 40 radio stations were playing, and then along came FM radio, and we listened to that too. And if we were going to produce our own music and weren't playing our own instruments, we had something that I know is an antique model to you called a turntable with these discs that we put down and put a needle on it, and it played records and albums. I know that's hard for you to imagine, but maybe you've seen them in antique stores. And then along came 8-track tapes, big bulky tapes that we punched into the this cavity in our in the automobile to listen to stuff, and the tape would get all wrapped around, and we'd ruin the tape, and so we wouldn't be able to listen to that. You have by comparison, an infinitude of choices about, you can design your own music on your iPod or whatever other